God, that you are with us, that you are for us. God, thank you that your love is gracious and patient for us. God, help us to take the cares and the worries of the week right now and to lay them at your feet, to trust you with the stress and the relationships, with the joys, the worries, all of it. And God, may we simply meet with you. God, we know that you love us, that you want life for us, and so help us to hear through your word where we're to find life as you meant it to be found. Open our eyes to see you anew, that we not be filled with guilt and shame, but with joy and peace. God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. All the people said? Amen. Well, good morning, church. You did it. We're here again. It's good. I want to introduce you to Ryan Kaji. Ryan is a 9-year-old boy who opens toys on the internet. This is what he does. He unboxes toys. Ryan Kaji last year made $25 million opening toys on the internet. So, in this series called The Pursuit of Happiness, I thought we would start with some collective sadness. Opening toys, that's all he does. And I didn't understand it. I could not understand it until I realized that my kids' birthday parties, or birthday parties my kids go to, there's this moment, and maybe you know it, when the presents are being opened, the kids just, they flock, they hover. It's like a magnet. And they love watching other people open presents. There's this excitement in the room of a birthday party, watching somebody else open their presents. And doing a little study on that, I realized the reason for this is because in our brains, we have these things called mirror neurons. That's right. That's where we're going today. Mirror neurons. Okay, mirror neurons. You can take it off, Ryan. Back on me. Mirror neurons are these neurons in our brain that when we see someone else doing something, they fire and make us feel like we're doing it ourselves. These are really helpful for us in infancy. They help us to learn how to mimic behavior, right? You mimic something and a child does it, and it helps us to learn new behaviors. We see things happening and we can feel them ourselves, and it also gives us a sense of empathy. It allows us to have empathy for others. We can put ourselves in their shoes, that we see something and we feel like we're doing it ourselves. An example of these mirror neurons in our brains. You know when you have a yawn and you just can't hold it, and it's like your jaw gets heavy, and you fight it, and it has to come out, and you have to yawn, and the more you talk about yawning or think about it and try and fight it, the more you have to yawn. Yeah? Oh, yes, I'm seeing a couple. Yes, this is the only chance you have to yawn while I'm doing this, so enjoy it. But yawning is an example of this, because I need to yawn again here soon. I keep talking about it. Because these mirror neurons fire. Scientists don't fully understand it, but it's something to do with these mirror neurons where we see someone else yawning and we feel like we have to do it ourselves. Just an example of that right now. But what mirror neurons also mean is that we can live vicariously through the lives of other people. That when we see something, particularly on a screen, we feel like we are there doing it alongside them. So we feel like when we're watching a movie that we're in the F-14 alongside Tom Cruise, right? We feel like we're in that coffee shop sitting on a couch with a group of our friends. Or we feel like we're on the field with our team charging towards the end zone, even though we're sitting on our couch the whole time. It can kind of trick us. And now, the interesting thing with entertainment, we spend... the average American spends almost $3,000 a year being entertained. But the interesting thing about sort of this screen life that we have, our televisions at home, and now even amazingly these phones in our pockets, is that we think it's normal. Everyone has one, it's just normal life. But when you really zoom out and you look at human history, it's such a brand new concept. But new technology and new things like this aren't just a neutral add-on to our lives. They change us. Canadian philosopher, professor Marshall McLuhan said that the medium is the message, meaning that new technology and the way that we receive information actually changes us and becomes the message itself. For example, Back in the 1400s, Gutenberg invented the printing press, a huge deal, that now books could be mass-produced and be put in the hands cheaply in common people. And this wasn't just oh great, now people could have books. No, it changed the world, because now you had books and you had information and you had truth in the hands of common people, where once it was only in the hands of the wealthy and those in power, and it actually led to the revolutions we have in the world. Even and particularly when Bibles got put in the hands of everyday people, common folk, they started to read the Bible for themselves and see that the church leadership, it was making no sense. They weren't actually following the Bible at all, and it led to the Protestant Reformation, and we're part of the fruit meeting here today of the Protestant Reformation, all because the technology of the printing press. Fast forward to the late 1800s, and you've got radio. Again, radio changed society, changed the way we view music and news and politics. And for the first time in human history, people would gather indoors and sit together, sitting passively being entertained, as radio programs would be beamed over the air. It changed entertainment. And then you have television in the 1920s, and I don't think we can even fathom how much television has changed the way that we perceive reality. It used to be that you just lined information up and facts and truth and judged them based on themselves. But now we have visualizations where we actually need the appearance of things to matter. Appearance matter just as much as content. That they need to be appealing. And this famously happened, one of the first times, the first political televised debate was Kennedy versus Nixon. And Kennedy was suave and handsome and comfortable on the camera, right? And he was confident. And Nixon was sweaty and uncomfortable, and Kennedy was judged a hands-down winner, even though it wasn't about the argument at all. It was about the appearance of it. And so now we have the need for things to appear pleasing and not just be true. It changed the way that we think. Then you have the internet in the 90s, and again, it has had massive implications for our lives. Where we're now, we are an instant society. We have to have things now the way that we want them exactly. We want to customize things, and we want them immediately. It's changed our patience as a people. And not only that, but internet has also changed the platform. There used to be gatekeepers. Even when it was television or radio, there were gatekeepers that you would give people a platform. This person has the credentials to speak on this topic, and they're given a platform. Now, with the internet, there is one level platform that everyone shares. And so the PhD tenured professor has the exact same platform as the 14-year-old in his mom's basement. And what happens is now we have sort of all this fake news and conspiracy theories, and we question everything because who knows who's saying what? It's changed us. And then you add on to that social media. Social media, for us today, it just feels normal again, but you realize that social media has only been around for a decade and a half. That's it. But it's become such a prevalent part of our lives that we don't even notice. We think it's normal, but it's changing. Last week we talked about happiness and how happiness is really, there's 4 chemicals in your brain. That's it. Pop quiz, I'm just kidding. No, there's just 4 chemicals. That's it. That's all there is. That's all happiness is. The interesting thing about social media is that 2 in particular. You got dopamine, which is this reward chemical. I did it. I achieved it. It's a celebration high. It's what we get when we accomplish something. That dopamine can happen simply by posting a picture on social media. Instead of just watching something on a screen, now we're becoming part of the content. You can post something and someone will like it. And every like is like this little shot of dopamine, a little reward. A little reward. And serotonin is this chemical we get when we feel connected to people, when we feel like we're valuable, respected, a part of a community. And we can get serotonin when someone comments on our picture, right? And we feel like, whoa, yes, look how valuable and respected I am. And we can celebrate what's going on and get these little artificial doses of serotonin and dopamine just on our phones. It's changed the way that we think. The problem is that, like most things in the world, like look at water and electricity, it always follows the path of least resistance. So, when you're sad, when you're low, when you're bored, all you have to do is pull this out of your pocket and you've got every movie and every television show and social media and the endless scroll, it's all right there in your pocket. Even the very fact that we can unlock something with our faces is like a little reward every time it unlocks. Then you open it up and, there's a beautiful picture of someone you love there, and it's a little shot of dopamine every time you open your phone, every time you open an app, and how pleasing it is to push that button and sometimes get a little vibration and it opens up. It's dopamine. The problem is that whenever you reward a behavior with a shot of some kind of happiness chemical, it reinforces that behavior, meaning that we become addicted to these easy, quick shots of happiness. And so in moments where I'm feeling low, I could go and exercise, or I could go and take someone out for a coffee, or I could go and play with my kids, or do something productive, but that's more work than the path of least resistance, which is to pull this out and get a quick fix and numb the boredom. And we find ourselves connected. It was the VP, one of the VPs of Facebook, in an interview at Stanford, once said this: "I feel tremendous guilt responding to a question about his involvement in exploiting consumer behavior." Here's what the VP of Facebook said: "The short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created are destroying how society works." When was the last time you went to the bathroom without this? I mean, what would I do in there without it, right? I mean, I might be bored for a moment. I mean, you go to a restaurant, and while the food, where you're waiting for the food, look around at the other, put your own phone down and look around at the other tables, and you'll see everyone is just sitting on their devices. Of course they are, because there's just instant, quick dopamine and serotonin, and we can be entertained whenever we want. And we've become addicted to these things. And the problem is the moment we start to feel the slightest feeling of boredom or sadness, it's the quick fix. It's the easy thing, or even just to go and turn on your television. But what is the purpose of this system that we have in our brains? We talked about it last week, that God has wired these systems in our brain, reward systems, in order to drive us into something in particular. There's something about story that we're connected to. We love good, deep, epic stories. I think it's because God has wired us to want to be part of an epic story, right? I used to think Lord of the Rings was this epic story, and now they've added like 150 hours to it. But what God is calling us into is actually the most epic story ever written. What we have in the Bible is not a rule book. It's not a rule book and not a list of laws. What we have is a story. From beginning to end, written over thousands of years in 66 books, it's a library. And it's a holistic story. It begins in Genesis chapter 1, the introduction. Every good story has introduction where you have to meet characters, and we meet God and who God is and what God yearns for and his created intent, that he just wants to pour out love and grace and to create humanity in order to have a relationship. It's a love story from the very beginning. And he creates us and he calls us very good. And there's us and God in the garden in perfect reality where we actually know God, and there's this relationship walking with God. The introduction, but then very quickly in Genesis chapter 3, we have conflict. And conflict comes in when Adam and Eve, the first people, they see this tree, and it's not about the fruit at all, but rather in choosing to eat this forbidden fruit, Adam and Eve are saying, you know what, God, I don't need you. Like, how dare you tell me what to do? I've got this on my own. And what they say is, God, I don't need you. Leave me alone. And God responds by giving them what they ask for. And this beautiful thing that was meant to be this love story of God and humanity is broken, and now God is separate. He's separated because of this sin and their rebellion. And what we see in the Old Testament is the result, a lot of just the messy chaos of people living without God, apart from the created intent, apart from God. And it's bloody, and it's chaotic, and it's violent, and it's terrible. In Judges, it says everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And sometimes we feel like that's how I want to live. I just want to do whatever I want to do. But we see as we look, not just in the Bible, look at history. When people just do whatever they want, it leads to chaos. But God is not okay leaving that story just where it is in this brokenness. And then we enter into chapter 3 where God begins to do a new work. And he enters into creation. And he begins to do something where there's this love story where he's trying to draw people back in. And he starts with one person, Abraham. Abraham's the super old dude. His wife Sarah, and they have no children, and they're barren, and they've got one foot in the grave, seemingly. And God says, here's the deal. You're going to have a child. and out of that child a nation, and I'm going to use you to sort of begin this process of drawing the world back to me. And it's this ridiculous story, this amazing story. But out of Abraham, there's Isaac, and Isaac has Jacob, and Jacob's name changes to Israel, and that's where we get that word. It's Israel, God's people. It's this nation that's been called to go out into the world and be a light to the other nations, and tell them about God's love and his grace and his forgiveness, about who he is and how they were made to know him and walk with him. Go out and tell the world that God is doing a new thing. And this is in the story where we expect there to be some kind of a montage, right? Like an 80s Hall & Oates song playing and all these amazing scenes of them going out and loving people. But that's not what happens. They're terrible at it. They're terrible. It's this downward cycle of them failing and failing and failing and failing and failing, and God continuing to be patient and gracious. But we see all the way through the story of the Bible is that sin prevents us, the sin curse on us prevents us from actually following God, that we need to remain autonomous and independent, and we push him away. And so what we need is a hero. Enter chapter 4. Jesus, God himself, enters into humanity, being our representative as fully God and fully human, who becomes the perfect Adam, who doesn't disobey, who starts over again, who then becomes the perfect Israel, who isn't falling into temptation, but is serving and being a light in Israel's place. And then in his death, frees us from the curse, this sin, this curse that's on us that prevents us from actually following God. Jesus takes it on himself on the cross, dies in our place, freeing us, setting us free, making us a new creation so that now we can truly follow by the gift of his Spirit. And then Jesus goes up in the resurrection we talked about a few weeks ago, in his ascension, and he gives his disciples, and there's this correlation. You've got the 12 tribes of Israel, maybe you've heard of them. You have 12 disciples. And so there's this continuation of the story where then he says in Matthew chapter 28, you'll see it on the screen here behind me. And Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. Behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. Jesus sends the disciples out with a mission that we now live here and today in the church age, the part of this story known as the church age, where he's called us, the church and the church universal, to be that light in the world, to be the message of hope of this story that God, again, wants to draw us into relationship with himself. And we have a mission. Jesus left it with us and has given us gifts and opportunities and talents. There's a purpose. And someday he's coming back, and we await that day when he finally does away with sin and sickness and suffering. And in the meantime, we try and draw as many into that relationship as possible, however we can. That our lives have a purpose. There's meaning. Paul says it this way in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Here's what he has to say. And he, that's Jesus, died for all, that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who for their sake died and was raised, Jesus dying for us. From now on, therefore, as a result of the work of Jesus, we regard no one according to the flesh. That's in the old way, the worldly way. Even though we once regarded Christ according to the flesh, we regard him thus no longer. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away, the new has come. All of this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. The garden, chapter 1, the beginning, the way it was supposed to be, us knowing God, walking with God. It's been broken, and through Christ, through Jesus, we are reconciled. That relationship is healed with us personally, and then he gives us the ministry of reconciliation, meaning that now we have this task to go and share that news, to spread it, to announce, to proclaim. In other places, Paul says that we are ambassadors, that we are his representatives in this life. And so all of this means that our lives now have a purpose. That we're not just floating through this life, trying to get through it without having pain and trying to fill it with as much happiness as we can. Our lives have a purpose and a meaning. And so as we look at these reward centers, the dopamine is supposed to drive us into these kinds of things, into kingdom impact. We know that our lives have an eternal impact. And honestly, I think about the last few months of my life, the things that fire me up the most is having conversations with some of you in this room that God is changing lives. That there are people in this room that right now are different people than they were 2 months ago. And it's shocking. It's shocking to see joy and hope and peace and life and purpose. And let me tell you that when you're involved in people's lives and you get to be a part of that, or even just see it, that's where the dopamine is supposed to come from, because it means something. That God is calling us into this work, that we know that what we do here matters forever. And there's that relational piece that first of all, we're supposed to get that in our relationship with God as we walk with him, that prayer isn't just this religious duty, but it's communication and it's relationship, and we go with God and then also be connected to other people as we pour our lives out into theirs. That's where we get that relational connection of serotonin. That's where it's supposed to come from. But how many of us, if we look at our time, the time that God has given us, what do we do with it? It's been said that what you do with your time is the definition of who you are in your life. And how often do we find ourselves simply killing time? Confession, way too much. I'm bored, there's nothing going on, I'm just going to kill time. Time is our most precious resource. When you really think about it, as soon as it's gone, you never get it back. There is no way. It is an unrenewable resource. It's gone. We waste time, we don't get it back. And the older I get, the more I'm starting to see that. But what are we doing with the time that God has given us? Ephesians chapter 5. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, that's talking about experiencing the truth that God is telling us. Awake, O sleeper. Could also say, awake, O streamer. Arise from the dead, or arise from the couch, and Christ will shine on you. Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Aldous Huxley, who wrote A Brave New World, this dystopian novel about basically the pleasures and entertainments ruling over us. So the people will come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacity to think. I think this is one of the biggest struggles in the church today, is that for centuries, for most of human history, we had time to simply sit and ponder, what is the meaning of life? I'm going to die someday. Do I know where I'm going, and am I okay with that? To wrestle with this existential angst and reality of life, and why am I here? We used to wrestle with those things. Now, the moment we're bored and have that space, we just pull it out. And we can numb it and stream a whole season of something. And this is far easier than contemplating or spending time with God. This is far easier. And we need to fight against this urge and realizing that our lives have a purpose. I don't think it's a coincidence. When you look at the studies and you see the rise of particularly adolescent anxiety and depression, that it has skyrocketed in the last decade. I haven't done the clinical study, but I feel like there's a correlation between anxiety and depression and media. And the reason I believe this is that we're getting these shots, these happy chemicals. We're getting through our days with the meaninglessness of watching others, of igniting our mirror neurons and watching other people do stuff. Meanwhile, the very things that those chemicals are supposed to drive us towards, of purpose and of connection, they're preventing. And so we're getting the results, but not doing the activities that we were made to do. And I think it causes this deep sense of frustration within ourselves. And what do we do when we're frustrated or feeling depressed or low or sad is, well, we go back to this, and it becomes this cycle of I get these temporary little bursts of happiness, and I can numb it, and I can focus on this show that I love or watch, throw myself into this game but we're still not adding things of meaning and value to our lives. We're not actually surrounding ourselves with connections. We can post more things on social media, but it really just drives us further away as they're really just a doctored artificial image of who we are. I mean, you've all seen pictures of people that they post. You're like, this looks nothing like you. Why? It's because they want someone to like it, and they need that dopamine. They need to feel the respect. And it becomes this cycle and this loop, and we don't know how to get out. And it's very depressing. And so, what do we do with this? I don't want to be legalistic, and I don't think we should be, going like, all screens are bad. You shouldn't watch movies. That's not what this is about. I think it's important that we hear the words of Paul in 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. I think, first of all, when it comes to this, we're free. Okay? It's not about setting up legalism of like, well, I don't watch movies, or, I don't have a smartphone, so I'm fine. It's not about setting up these legalistic parameters that become a religion in themselves. It's about realizing, hey, that we're free, but first of all, I think it's exposing what entertainment is. It's just tricking your brain. That's all it is. Today, when we're watching football and we're celebrating, maybe Oakland will, or maybe the Raiders will score a touchdown, who knows? But like when we're celebrating, maybe, I doubt it, but when we're celebrating, take yourself out of that situation. What did you just do? Nothing. Like, why are we so emotionally invested? That's not me. I'm sitting on the couch eating chips. Right? It's your brains. We're tricking our brains. They think they're in the game. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's fine to celebrate, especially do it with people and mourn over the loss of teams. Like, that's fine, but let's be honest about what it is. About our drive to want to watch those things is just tricking ourselves into like, I need purpose, I need meaning, I'm going to cling to, Real Housewives or whatever it is to try and find some kind of purpose. We need to know that's what we're doing, first of all. Second, we also need to know how dangerous it can be and that it can create a habit. Even this week, I've been trying to monitor it, even in my own life, where you have these moments where you're just sitting and you're like bored and like it's like it's out of your pocket before you even notice it. Right? Or like, how often do you go to open up an email and all of a sudden you're like scrolling through Facebook? You're like, how did I get here? What happened? Did it turn itself on? Like, no, it's because we're addicted. So let's first of all acknowledge those things. Realize the danger, and then each of us in our own convictions before God need to make a plan of like, what am I going to do with this? Am I okay being addicted and I'm going through life just being entertained? Or will we make a commitment to say, no, you know what? There's something greater to be a part of. That Jesus is calling me into life, and a device or my television or my video game is not it. There's a reason why you can spend all that time on a video game, waste your whole Saturday, and go like, oh, I feel gross. It's because you just literally wasted a day. Do we want to be part of something greater? And so my challenge for you this week is to wrestle with those things, exposing them for what they are, realizing the danger that they are addictive, put a plan in place. But I encourage you this week, first of all, pick a day. I challenge you, pick a day where you will shut off the screen. When in those moments, and it's called cortisol, you'll feel it. You'll feel low, you'll feel sad, you'll feel like you're jonesing for something, like, ooh, I need to watch something. Embrace the cortisol and realize that you're breaking free of an addiction and turn it off for a day, put it aside, and do something else instead. Go for a walk. Leave your phone at home. Go for a walk. Or call someone up. Like, don't just text them even. Call them and hear their voice. Call them and say, hey, let's go for a coffee. And sit and have a good conversation with your phones left away. Build that serotonin. Or, here, a radical thought. Find something that you can do on that day that serves someone else. You don't even have to get paid for it. Just go and do something that helps someone else. And you're going to walk away, even though it's hard work and you maybe didn't enjoy it in the moment, you're going to walk away when it's done and you're going to feel what? You feel good. It's dopamine. It's what it's there for. It's to reward that behavior. And I guarantee you at the end of that day, if you put those things in place, you're going to feel so much better at the end of the day than you did simply spending it in front of a screen. because God is calling you into life, and that life has a purpose. It's not just about being entertained, it's about purpose, and it's about relationship and connection. And so the big question is, what do you want to do with the time that you've been given, because it's finite? What will you be about in the time that you've been given? Entertaining yourself through it, or being a part of this epic story that God is writing and he's inviting you into, that someday we see the part that we played alongside the characters in this story, knowing that your life and your time made an impact in someone else's life for eternity. That's what he's made us for. Let's pray. Father, thank you that you have patience for us, that you are gracious and loving, and even though we are so prone to wasting so much of the time you've given us, you continue to wait on us. It's a love story where you're trying to draw us to yourself so that we might have life. Help us to see you, Jesus, to hear your voice, and to follow you even when it's the difficult thing to do. Give us the discipline to order our lives aright. We pray this in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.